Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Jay Sunde with us, an entrepreneur from the SMB Deal Hunter community who's both started and acquired several businesses, from construction to pool and spa businesses to daycare. So Jay, it's great to have you on today. Very excited to hear your story.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Jay, tell us, where are you based? Like, what's your background? How did you get into entrepreneurship, both starting and acquiring businesses?
Sure. So I live in Chapel Hill now. I grew up in Southern Virginia, went to Virginia Tech, so got a degree in finance there, and so started my career in corporate America. Pretty boring. Staff accountant, financial analyst. Worked for a large healthcare company. I was basically doing all the financial analysis for a portfolio that was like 40 or $50 million. The whole company was probably 250 million, and so I was kind of the glue that did all the financial analysis for our portfolio of locations. While I was doing that, I basically wanted to be my own boss or have my own company or basically kind of chart my own course. So I was trying to think of what was the best path to that. And growing up, my father was a commercial masonry contractor. Basically a small but profitable company he ran, and he did everything. He laid brick, he did bids. So growing up, I was kind of part of that world. And so when I was young in my 20s, I said, well, the housing market is exploding and it's pretty easy. There's a low barrier to getting your contractor's license. So I took a course on the weekend, passed the test, and then through my financial analysis really put together here's a neighborhood, here's the house of a lot, and I know how much you can build a house for, and here's the selling price. So I made a presentation to a bank and said, hey, can I get a loan for this project? And they said yes. So at that point I said, well, now I've got to figure out how to actually build houses. um, and I was working in corporate America at the time. So I actually called a bunch of home builders and said, hey, will you partner with me and just answer the phone and help me? And I'll pay you 15 grand. And so I found a guy who did. And, I was going to job sites before work, going to job sites at lunch, going to job sites after work. So really working two jobs at the time. And, uh had a child during that time, and so life got really crazy. A full-time job, a side job, a child, and you could start to feel the tension with my corporate job, being away or being kind of pulled in two different directions. So there was a family who was building in an adjacent neighborhood, and they wanted me to price their home. And so I said, I'm going to price this for 2 years income, and if I get the job, I'm going to quit. And I did, and I've never went back to work since then. So that
And
kind
how old were you then?
26, 25 or 26.
Wow, I
So
love
pretty,
that.
yep. So I built houses kind of in the 2000s, and it was lucrative while it lasted. It was, doing three or four jobs a year. It's pretty manageable, and you only have to keep three or four clients happy. Um, and then in 2008, 2009, as everybody knows, the financial crisis, the housing market kind of got bad. And so I had three spec homes for sale, which was very very nerve-wracking at the time, right? You're spending 15 or $16,000 a month in interest to a bank for a house that's sitting there, and you see the market tanking. So I was able to exit or sell each of those, some at a small profit or some at a loss. And kind of as that was happening, I said, I've got to figure out what's next. Is it going back to work? Is it starting a business? Is it buying a business? Kind of what does the future look like? And my kind of most desired path was buying a business. So I was looking on BizQuest and BizBuySell, kind of in a 2 to 3 hour radius of where I was, for businesses that could replace the income that I was making from home construction. And so I found a pool and spa service company that was about an hour away. And that was like late 2007, 2008, and went under contract to buy it, got a loan approval from a bank. And then as we went through the process, the bank essentially withdrew their approval because of the financial crisis.
Wow.
So that kind of put the deal on ice in 2008. And at the same time, my wife and I had two young boys, and their preschool was closing. And we really loved the director, loved the program, and it was a part-time flexible program. And so in the fall of '08, we were looking for childcare centers for them. And so um, we looked all over. This one was too far. This one was too expensive. We didn't like the teachers here, so we couldn't kind of find the right preschool program. And so I said, well, why don't we just start our own? And my wife said, "You're completely crazy." And I said, "Well, yes, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it." So as we looked, we had all these friends who were on waiting lists for really good preschools. And our son's preschool is closing, so there's, a chunk of kids there that's looking for a preschool. We knew of another one that was closing. So I kind of said, look, there's demand in the market here, and I think we should do this. But more than anything else, we can build something for our kids that we like. So this was all 2008. The pool stuff and the preschool stuff was happening kind of in parallel. So um, in the spring of '09, I actually ended up closing on that pool business with seller financing. And it was pretty typical Main Street business, seven or 800,000 in revenue, 20% margins, um, normal multiple, 3.5 EBITDA. And so I put a down payment on that, and the seller financed it. I think it was 7 years at the time. So it's not a bad term for, fully seller financed. And then during that spring, a very similar business came available in Chapel Hill, right where I lived. And so I thought, well, gosh, if I'm going to do this, there's some economies of scale. Why not just try to do both? I'm the person who bites off more than I can chew and then just figures out how to do it. Um, and so most people said you're crazy, but I approached the seller and said, "Hey, I'm buying this other business. I'd love to buy yours also. I live in Chapel Hill." And I said, the banks are not lending, so I can do the down payment if you finance it. And so we did that deal also. So I actually closed on one in March of 2009 and the next one in April of 2009. So it was a big change very quickly.
Wow. And when did the preschool open?
It opened August of 29. So it was
That
2000.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Three
So
businesses in 1 year.
three businesses in 1 year. And the preschool, we actually decided to do it in February. We found a director in March, and we saw a sign go up on the building April 15th. It was tax day 2009. I saw the sign go up. I toured it the next day, put a deposit. So it was like March and April of 2009 were about as crazy as it could possibly get.
That's that's insane. It's just crazy because at that time, I think a lot of people, didn't know what to do, obviously, and you just took action, which is amazing. And with the pool and spa businesses, what did you like about them? Kind of what jumped out at you? You were probably looking at a bunch of different businesses for sale for that first business you were
Yeah.
buying.
I
Was there something you were looking for in particular, or?
Well, I was industry agnostic at the time. I kind of didn't know what I know now. I mean, I definitely have a lot more experience and knowledge now. Um, you know, One of the positives that both the sellers and like anybody I talked to told me about was, homeowners are not going to let their broken pool or their dirty pool go unattended to, right? If you've got a pool, the motor breaks, you gotta fix it, right? And it might not be my company, but essentially the homeowner's got to fix it. It's like having a car or HVAC for your home. If you've got the pool, you got to fix it.
Yeah.
So that was one good point. Where we are in Chapel Hill, there really wasn't a lot of competition, and that probably matches the demand also. But essentially, there weren't a dozen pool companies. There were two or three. So homeowners really had a limited option. It's either they're going to do it themselves or they're going to want to choose one of the two or three options. Um, there was a recurring element. Homeowners and kind of where we are open their pool in the spring, close their pool in the fall. So that's kind of a chunk of revenue that you get. And then we had, I don't know, 50 to 70 weekly recurring clients. So that's a recurring revenue source. And you know, they're a more affordable, or that's a lower margin piece because you got it recurring than one-off service. But yeah, that was kind of it. It was close. I felt like I could learn it quickly enough. It didn't have like a high knowledge barrier. You definitely had to learn some things about the industry and the chemistry specifically, but I felt like it had an approachable kind of knowledge threshold. It had recurring revenue, and there wasn't a ton of competition where we were. So those are kind of the things that made me comfortable with it.
And when you acquired the business, was it kind of like retiring owner? Was there much of a team in place, or what did it look like for you to take over? What did that transition period look
Yeah,
like?
no, that's a great question. So both of the owners were like late 50s, early 60s, to your point. And I've seen kind of now looking back 20 years down the road, you see a lot of small business owners at that like 8 to 12 year mark just kind of say, I've had enough, right? Like good run, it's been profitable for me and my family, but like I'm kind of tired of it. And that was really the situation with both these people. I think one of them had owned the business 9 years and the other one 13. So they were at that point where it was just kind of like, I'm at the stage in life where I want to stop, and I'm at the kind of frustration stage of the business where I want to stop. But yeah, there was a small team in place at each. There was a retail manager and a service manager, and the revenue was like 60-40 service to retail. Right. So
Right.
if anybody's ever been in a pool store, you go and you buy chemicals, you buy floats, you buy parts. So there's service and retail, and there was a service manager, a retail manager, and then a couple people under each of them. Um, but I took two owners that were pretty active in the business that were during the summers at least were working 50 or 60 hours, and I replaced both of them. So it was a 2000 summer of 2009, 10. It was really tough because I took on just a ton of hour commitment from those businesses.
That's wild. And what was it like? I mean, what were you focusing, but I guess even before acquiring them, did you see an opportunity to grow them where you just like had like the stable cash flow and that's what I'm looking, because you're looking to replace your income.
Right.
But were you looking for something where like there's a growth opportunity here? Or...
Definitely. I mean, at the time, my thinking was more growth by acquisition, right? Hey, if we're in Chapel Hill and Lexington, we can buy Greensboro and Winston-Salem and Sanford and Raleigh. And like you can start to over time either grow via startup or grow via acquisition in a geographic kind of footprint. Again, I'm the guy who bites off more than he can chew. So that was my thinking at the time. Um, and you get in, and like any business, there's positives and negatives. There are things I really liked about the business and things that were really bad. I mean, if we're going to talk about the negatives,
Yeah, tell us some of the good and bad about, with the pool service business.
yeah, I think one of the negatives, and I remember talking to one of my kids' friends on the playground about this, and she said, "That's so interesting. I never would have thought of that." So one of the things is that it's so cyclical that like in March, April, May, when people decide they want their pool open, you need, let's say, 8 service technicians. And then by the time all the pools are open, you need 5 service technicians because that opening frenzy is gone. And like the opening takes longer. You got to go back multiple visits. If things are broken, you discover it then. So then it goes down to like maybe 4 or 5. And you kind of have this steady state June, July, August that you need 5. And then in September, October, November, you need 8 again because you got to close all the pools. And then once they're all closed, well, you only need 2 because you're only doing hot tubs and pools, which aren't many open. So just from a staffing standpoint, needing 2 people for 4 months a year, 8 people for 4 months a year, 5 people, like it's really tough. And then the other thing that people don't realize is that pool service technicians actually have to have a really broad and diverse skill set. So plumbing, obviously. Um, if you're working on pumps or motors, you need to have electrical experience. And then a lot of pools have heaters, so you need HVAC and gas
Wow.
experience. And then there's the pool specific tile, skimmers, water chemistry. So like a pool technician actually is like a plumber, HVAC, electrical, and pool all rolled into one. And that's really hard to train for, right?
Interesting. Yeah, I actually would not have imagined that, but yeah, was hiring always a challenge, or did they already have
Well, so
technicians?
it was always a challenge. Um, both the companies had people in place, and at the top, like the service manager was pretty consistent because they had a good salary and multi-year experience. But in the like 12 to $18 per hour range, guys that come and go, it was hard because people either didn't want to work, or they didn't want the winters off, or they didn't have the skill set, or they didn't have the customer service skills. This is the other thing. If they're a pool tech, they've got to be good with the customer too, right? Because they're walking into this homeowner's backyard. So it wasn't just that trade stuff. They actually had to have good customer service skills too. So hiring was always hard. And then the other thing, this is what I told my son's friend's parent, is that pool owners are always angry. And it's very strange to me that like if your heat goes out in your house, oh, the HVAC guy, it's $1,800 for a condenser, I've got to fix it. But with swimming pools, they were so frustrated and mad and angry that they had to do this thing. It's almost like they took it out on the pool company. And I saw that consistently over all locations, all demographics, all time. And it's not 100%, but it's way higher than other industries.
I would not have expected that. Pool
Yeah.
owners being angry. That's so interesting. Why do you
Yep.
think that is?
I think part of it, and this may be way too deep a psychological analysis, but I think a lot of it is when you get the pool, your kids are 12 or 13. It's beautiful in the backyard. Kids come and play. It's maintenance free, right? Because everything's brand new and it's not going to break for 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road. But then by the time you get to 8 years down the road, the kids are in college, you're not using the pool anymore. It costs a lot to open it, it costs a lot to maintain it, it's underutilized, all these things. And then this guy comes out and says, "Oh, it's going to be $2,800 for this thing." Very frustrated, very angry. Whereas if it's your brakes on your car, you say, just got to do it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was it, but who knows? And we had great customers that were friendly people, but it seems a lot higher percentage in that industry than a lot of others that I know.
That's interesting. And any positives about the pool and spa business?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the sellers told me they make new water every year, right? Every new pool that gets built is a service for you down the road. Um, and so, I don't think it's not an industry that I would never go to into again, but it's certainly I think it's tough. I think it's a tough industry. And I don't know Florida, Texas, Arizona, but in those markets, I think part of the challenge is there's so much competition. You got to drive your pricing down to be competitive. So I think pricing is more of a challenge in those markets.
Right. They don't deal with the seasonality, but they do
Right.
deal with,
Yeah,
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 that makes sense.
competition pressure. Yeah.
That's interesting. And what were you focused on, I guess, when you took over? Obviously three businesses when you're two through acquisition, you basically took two owners' jobs that first one. What did that look like?
So, I mean, the businesses were successful, so I was focused on trying to keep the train running down the like it was, right? I mean, I acquired them because they were profitable and they had a good staff and they had a good name recognition. So I was really just focused on continuing things as they were and trying to make as few changes as possible. Um, and you know, like a lot of businesses, we'd have one customer who'd get mad and go to another company, and then, the same week we'd have two customers call us and say, "Oh, this pool and spa company did a bad job. We want to use you." So it was kind of the normal course of business. What I saw, acquiring in 2009, is that the internet was starting to erode retail. Right. And so I think when I bought the businesses, probably like 7% of pool chemicals or pool products were bought online. And by the time I sold, it was 28%. So over
Mm.
that time, we saw the retail component decrease, which is probably true for a lot of industries in that time frame. But when I bought them, I was really focused on connecting with the employees and connecting with the customers and keeping things on track because they'd been successful to that point.
And how long did it take you to eventually, get out of from running the day to day? Because you had a lot on your plate.
Yes. For the first two years, I definitely ran both of them very actively. Um, and then by year three, the one that was an hour away had seen a little bit more reduction in retail. And so I tried to kind of push a lot of the responsibility to the staff for that one more. Um, and then I sold that one in 2012. So it was pretty quick, right? A pretty quick turnaround. And then for the one in Chapel Hill where I live, we ran it for another, I guess 5 or 6 years from that point. Um, I stayed more active and involved in that probably until 2015. Um, and to kind of switch back to the childcare and preschool path, we opened the first childcare center cash flow positive from month one, which is astounding. We had a pretty limited occupancy cost, pretty low overhead, and we opened cash flow positive, and it grew month over month. And then we got the opportunity to buy the building that we were renting in 2011. So we acquired it. And then I think we acquired that in June of 2011. And then in October of 11, we got a mailer for another childcare building in Durham, which is 20 minutes away from us. And I went and toured it and I said, this is perfect. This is exactly right for our second location. So I kind of went down the path of trying to acquire the other building for childcare in Durham, which was adjacent to us.
And with I guess with the childcare businesses, you continued growing some organically, you continued acquiring some.
Yeah.
Um, what was any sort of learnings from, the two different approaches, which you would do more now? Yeah, what's your take on both and how
Sure.
did those go?
Sure. So if you think about childcare and I guess other businesses that have a high lifetime value of customer or high like monthly revenue, it takes a long time to onboard someone like that, right? If you're making a childcare decision, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of choices, and families are going to be very like careful with who they choose. But if you have a family on board at 3 months old and the yearly tuition is 15 grand, that's a 60 or $70,000 lifetime customer, right? Whereas a pool customer who's paying you three or 400,000, not $300 or $400 per year
Yeah.
is not as big, right? So in the childcare business, it's for most people, and I can say this from our more recent startups, it takes longer to get to a break even point and profitability, but it's pretty steep after you kind of hit that break even point. Whereas with something like, you know, pool business, a concrete business, a fence business, a roofing business, a pressure washing business, you can be profitable in 3 months. Um, because you put some ads out there, you get somebody to call you, you can make money. But whereas with childcare, you got to put a lot of capital and time in front of your profitability. Um, so we were really lucky to open cash flow positive, but for our three kind of startups since then, it's been a longer road and it's definitely the right decision. But you gotta buy the building or rent the building, do all the, FF&E, furniture, upfit, marketing, advertising, hiring people before you open, all the licensing stuff. So you got a lot of capital outlay for a startup like that before you become profitable. But like I said, if you keep families happy and you keep kids for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the lifetime value is really high in that business, which I like.
And what made you decide to acquire some preschools as well?
Yeah, so we opened our second location in 2012 and it kind of charted the same course. And so at that point, sometime 13, 14, I said, the pool business is really hard. The childcare business is hard, but we had directors and assistant directors in both locations. So we weren't working minute to minute, hour to hour on the childcare at all. We kind of made executive level, directional decisions. So around that time I said, this is the way that I think, we should go with our portfolio and our livelihood. And so let's look at Chapel Hill and Durham and think about what makes them good markets and what are the other markets we want to look at for opportunities like that. And so we said, okay, let's define the Southeast, and we want to look at cities like Wilmington and Richmond and Knoxville and Nashville and Lexington, Kentucky and Louisville and Atlanta and, Greenville, South Carolina, kind of these cities that are of a decent size. They maybe have universities and maybe have industries that are kind of foundational to the city, Whole Foods, good economics in the town.
Whole
So
Foods, I love that.
it's like, well, with Chapel Hill and Durham, it was like, well, both towns have universities, both towns have Whole Foods, both towns have, technology or education as a foundational industry. So we actually were looking for opportunities to replicate that. And ultimately, I was just scanning LoopNet for buildings that could accommodate childcare. And if it seemed like a good fit, I'd kind of do a little more digging or due diligence. And if it was a really good fit, I'd go tour again, fly to Richmond or Chattanooga or wherever, tour it, and then see if it was an opportunity. So the third childcare we started was in Lexington, Kentucky, which again, university, Whole Foods, that's a horse town. So there's tons of horse money and families that are tied to that industry. So we opened our third location in 2015. And then right on the heels of that in 2016, we opened an elementary school in Durham. So private elementary school, which is a, periphery, but definitely different industry than childcare. So we went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 pretty quickly, or it felt like quickly. Um, and so in 16, 17, we really started to feel the sting of the Lexington school wasn't performing like the other two schools had. It was just slower. And then the elementary school was the same thing. We'd had all these requests from our preschool families in Chapel Hill, Durham. We'd love an elementary school. We don't want to stop at kindergarten. We want to keep going. So we had, at that point, we had 4 boys, all of which were still in school. And so we said, hey, our customers want this. We want this for our kids. We feel like education is not really what it should be. It's kind of broken in a lot of ways. So let's do this innovative elementary school. And we had the preschool in Lexington that wasn't performing, the elementary school that wasn't performing. And so you get 2 years into that and you're thinking, man, like, what have we done wrong? How do we go astray here? And so I feel like my wife, who was involved in the preschools pretty heavily. To that point, said it's too much, right? Like there's just so much to manage. You know, four directors, four buildings, different families, different towns. We wanted to figure out a way to kind of pivot. So I said, well, we can close something, but we've got to we've got to replace that income. So so our very first school, the Chapel Hill School, had been actually the toughest to staff for those two prior years. And the Lexington School had been the least profitable. And our Durham School had kind of become the anchor of the portfolio in terms of profitability. So I said, I can go out and look for childcare centers that are, for sale that are going to replace this income. And that's what we did. We found an opportunity in Georgia, right outside Atlanta, and it was kind of like our other schools, about a million two revenue and 20-25% margins, and went out and did an SBA loan for that and acquired that in September of 18. So at that time, we decided we would close our Chapel Hill school and rent it. And actually, about 2 or 3 months after that, we got an inquiry from a real estate broker on the Lexington school that said, "Hey, I know you're running this, but I've got a client who's looking for this exact type of building to run childcare. Would you be interested in renting?" And I said, "Well, actually, we're looking to kind of pivot our portfolio, so let's have that discussion." And so we went from three schools and an elementary school and kind of pared it back down to two schools and an elementary school. But the one that we acquired in Georgia was profitable. So we had two profitable schools, and then we were essentially landlords in commercial buildings for two properties at that time. Um, and yeah, the school in Georgia was kind of the same like the pool business. The owners were in their early 60s. They actually had another business. They had a trucking business that they were running with their daughter. They lived about an hour away. And so yeah, 3 years of steady results and good director in place and nice building, and so we felt really comfortable doing that acquisition, and it's been good for us.
No, that's incredible story. I'm curious with the school you ended up acquiring in Georgia. When you were diligencing that deal, you had already run multiple schools at this point. So what were you looking for? For folks that are listening to this, maybe who want to buy a child, maybe a childcare business, what should they be looking for if it's their first time?
Sure. So the business that we bought in Georgia was actually significantly different in terms of demographics than our other schools. Our other schools, like, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but maybe this is helpful for somebody who's thinking about it. So in terms of like most childcare, you kind of have three tiers. The bottom tier is like your least expensive, a high percentage of government assistance families, and that's maybe 15% of the market, 15-20% of the market. Then you've got your middle 60%, which is the majority of the market. If you think about daycares, that's probably what you're thinking about. A little bit of government assistance pay, mostly private pay, middle class, upper middle class families who are paying for nice childcare. And then the top 15 or 20% is really like Reggio, Montessori, private school, Duke School, Durham Academy, these private schools that have a really high end early childhood program that's really expensive. And so we had been running schools that were in that top tier, right? It's a Reggio inspired school. It's 16 to 1800 bucks a month. It's really low uh, student to teacher ratios. It's really nice buildings. It's really high end materials. It's really high touch with the families in terms of caliber of care and education and those sorts of things. So that's what we had founded and run up to that point. And the opportunity in Georgia was kind of that middle market, right? So some mix of government and private pay, similar to the other two or three schools in town in terms of, hey, mom and dad are a nurse and a policeman and they got to go to work. So this is what it is. Um, so it was a different part of the market, but in terms of childcare, I think the director matters a lot. And so we actually kind of secret shopped the center in Georgia twice. My wife went and I went, and we actually got a tour with the assistant director and the director to kind of get a sense, because a seller can tell you, oh, she's great, she's lovely, families love her, she's going to stay forever, but that might not always be the truth. So we secret shopped it to get comfortable with the building and the program and the directors. And then in terms of numbers, I think for people who are thinking about childcare, you can really kind of outsize your returns with three ways. The first one is having a low occupancy cost. And so that's kind of where we are now with some of our early schools, in that we bought a building in 2011 or 2012, so my mortgage is nothing like it would be right now if I if I bought that building and had to run the school, right? So we really have outsized returns because we've got low occupancy costs. So low occupancy cost is one way you can do that. Um, Really high-end product, right? So charging a premium, because the difference in staffing cost for a premium product are not as high as the difference in revenue for a premium product, right? So just to give people an analogy, like if average daycare is 1,000 and premium is 2,000, that's a 2x, right? But a staff member at an average daycare might be $15, but a staff member at a premium daycare might be $19 an hour. So
Hmm.
your staffing cost for a premium product is lower. So low occupancy costs, premium product, premium pricing, or the last one is really high volume. So we've avoided the world of um, Primrose schools. They're beautiful, they're amazing. The facilities are amazing, but it's 280 kids, right? You got two directors, three assistant directors, a technology person, a facilities person, a cook. Like it's a really, really massive, 15,000 square feet, 16,000 square feet
Wow.
buildings. And we've kind of avoided that world totally. But those are some of the ways you can get outsized returns. But in terms of just looking at or diligencing a childcare opportunity, I would say that the administration matters, and then the location. People kind of, for families who are choosing, location is so critical. And I would spend 1 or 2 days in every town that we looked at buying buildings, or the one in Georgia, to really think about where are the schools, where's the hospital, where's the university, where are the jobs. Is this on a main road? Is this off a main road? Is this the wrong direction to where people are going from housing to work? Because for a lot of families, just to be blunt, like convenience is a huge factor. And so even if it's a great director in a beautiful building, if they've got to drive 20 minutes out of the way, it won't work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I guess in terms of, going back to sort of the three different tiers of childcare, are there certain ones, now that you operate several of these schools, that you're more bullish on moving forward, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say I'm bullish on that middle market. Um, and what we've done, we acquired the school in 18, and then interestingly in 23 we circled back and we reopened our school in Lexington. So we rented it in 19, and the lease was heading kind of towards an end, and we were trying to decide if we wanted to re-rent it, sell it, or operate again. And we have a portfolio manager who kind of manages all the schools, and she and I, my wife, basically did some kind of market research in Lexington, calling every possible school we could to get a sense for pricing and availability. And so in Lexington, center after center after center, we're full, we're full, we're full. The wait list is 3 months long, 6 months long, 9 months long, however long. And so we said, look, we've got more than a dozen schools that are full, expensive, and have a long wait list. So it's really a good opportunity to reopen there. So we circle back, and we are now offering kind of that higher middle market product, um, because I feel like you can get to break even quicker if you're doing that elite kind of high end product. There's a smaller segment who are going to choose and pay that premium price. But in the middle market, like I said, it's your everyday Americans who are nurse and policemen, got to go to work, want a nice daycare. So that's what we opened in Lexington in 23. Then we acquired another building in October of 23 and opened a center in Lynchburg, Virginia. And we opened it under the same name, kind of with that same model, that same approach, the kind of the top end of middle market. And then we're actually reopening our Chapel Hill school this winter, early spring, into that same product. So we're kind of shifting from the high end back into that upper middle market. So that's where I would say I'm most bullish.
That's interesting. And what has made you, that you did that one acquisition of an existing daycare, the one in Georgia, why did you decide to, go out and start new ones from scratch versus, buying additional ones? Sort of what was that experience like compared to buying? I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Well, I missed on three acquisitions. Um, I know you know this and you tell your clients this. Getting deals done is hard. It's really hard, right? There's a million things that can derail it. And so we went under contract in, oh gosh, now I got to think back. So COVID was 20 to 21. In the summer of 21, we went under contract to buy a center in Virginia. And essentially, the negotiation took a little while. It was like our center in Georgia, kind of middle market. Director had been in place however long. Husband and wife were in their 60s. Kids moved away. Family, parents are old, so pretty predictable. Um, and the broker wanted us to use his loan officer, and so we did. We had a relationship with a couple banks already from doing SBA stuff, but we said, sure, we'll use. I don't want to, but to keep this relationship good, we'll use him. So he placed the deal with an SBA group out of Florida, and they said, okay, we're looking to close. If we're under contract July, we're going to look to close October. So come to October and they say, oh, we need all these things because we had a pretty big portfolio at that point. And so the bigger your portfolio is, the more SBA, documents for everything, countless, validations for everything, state certificates for everything. Um, and so October became November, November became December, December became January. And at that point, the sellers are like, look, guys, like we're trying to be with our kids, we're trying to be with our parents. Like this was supposed to close in October. What's going on? And so um, January became February, and finally the seller said, "Look, you got 7 days. If you don't close, we're out." So that deal fell apart, and we lost a bunch of money, and that was pretty frustrating. Um, Even before that, I guess going back, I kind of skipped one. We made an offer on a daycare in Charlotte, and full price offer, and it was super consistent revenue, super consistent profitability, fair pricing, and the seller ended up. I thought we were at the finish line in terms of signing the contract, and they chose a buyer out of Arizona. I guess a woman that she liked more to run the center. So it was like we missed on that one. The seller chose someone else. We made an offer on another one. We missed on that one for bank reasons. Then we made another offer on a center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Same story, kind of middle market, all the same metrics, and went under contract with that seller. And 8 or 9 days before we were supposed to close, she went radio silent on us, and
That's wild. That's
it,
horrible.
it was really frustrating. So what had happened is during the CARES Act, the government had released a bunch of funds to the states for childcare, and in Oklahoma, they had really kind of withheld or held back the funds right to the end of that period. And so we went under contract in February, and in March, the state of Oklahoma announced, "Hey, you guys have been getting this much for COVID care stuff. For the next 3 quarters, you're going to get X." And so I think the seller's going to get like 210,000 over 9 months if she didn't
Wow.
sell. So it was like, why would I sell now? I'm going to, and it was kind of the wrong way to do it, right? Like as a seller, you can just be honest and say, "Hey, I have this opportunity. I'm not going to close." But she kind of went silent, and we had to get the broker involved, and it was ugly. So to answer your question about why build again, we had those three misses over 24 months, and it was really tough. Really, I felt like we burned 24 months with no progress.
And are you still, for those wondering, probably, are you still looking to acquire more? Um,
Yeah, I think we're equally open to acquisitions and startups. Acquisition.
what was the experience with the Georgia location after you guys took over? What was that like compared to, starting from scratch, I guess?
It was really good. My wife and I both had a really good relationship with the director, and we came in and we said, "Look, we don't want to change." Just like the pool businesses, we bought this because it's successful, and we don't want to change anything. We don't want to change the name. We don't want to change your teachers. We don't want to change the logo. We don't want to change where you're buying food from or your schedule. We bought this because it's successful. We want to support you, and we're here to do that. Um, and so with our acquisitions, I've kind of been in the mindset of, hey, you're buying this because it's working. Now, obviously, not all acquisitions are that way, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you buy because there's opportunity for upside, but we bought them really with the thinking of they're working, they're successful, they have a track record, so keep it going. And so we had a good relationship with the director, and we just said, hey, keep running things like they are. We're here to support you, and that's that. So that's been successful for us.
I guess going back to some of the centers that did less well, that kind of forced you to go into acquisitions to begin with of preschools. What were some of the reasons, some preschools did less well versus better now that you kind of maybe have some new perspective?
Hindsight, yeah. So I think it gets back to a couple of things that I've talked about. It's just the converse. So with our Chapel Hill school, when we finally decided to close it, we decided to close it for several reasons. But one of them was we had a ton of director turnover, right? So we hired a director. Her husband got a job in California. She left after 3 months. And my wife had to step in and run it day to day. Hired another director. She got pregnant with twins, left after 6 months. My wife had to step back in, hired another director. She got a better job at UNC, left after 2 months. And so that director turnover was really one of the reasons that school started to suffer a little bit in terms of enrollment and family satisfaction. And then the school that in Chapel Hill that we started was a little bit out of town. It was 4 or 5 miles out of town. And so when we started it, like I said, if you really think back, it was, hey, we want to do this thing for our kids. And I think that there's a market for it, but it wasn't like this is number one. It wasn't a grand vision of where we've got to be in town and which highway and where we are and all these sorts of things. So what was happening is we were seeing families saying, oh, I'm going to go to XYZ school, which is in town, or, oh, I'm going to go to XYZ school, which is right in my neighborhood. And so we were experiencing lower enrollment because of director turnover, lower family satisfaction because of director turnover, and a lower enrollment because of location, geography.
Yeah, no,
So,
that makes sense.
so that was one of the things. And then in Lexington, same thing. Really, it was staffing. We had a director who kind of the staff didn't like, and then we had another, turnover. And I think in Lexington, because it was farther, we couldn't really help with our vision. And like part of the reason we were successful in Chapel Hill and Durham with the two high-end schools was we had a network of doctors, lawyers, professors, uh, our kids' friends, parents, and our entire network or friend group or whatever in the local town. We could say, "Hey, I'm opening this great, amazing preschool on University Drive or on 54 or whatever." So we could really have more of a grassroots like messaging around it because we're local and like people know us and we know people and they know people. But in Lexington, it was more really kind of purely the market. And so trying to start a high-end exclusive preschool in a market where you're not there and can't really sell it and pitch it tended or ultimately didn't work as well. We were profitable, it was just really small.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess another question is, you went and down the SBA loan process. You've done deals with mostly seller financing when, banks weren't issuing loans. What was your experience with the SBA loan process? I think a lot of people are, especially first-time buyers, it's one of their only options, really. But what's been your perspective? Is that an approach you would recommend people go down? What was your experience like?
100% yes. Um, and so I guess going back when we started our first preschool in Chapel Hill in 2009, there was no loan. We rented 3 rooms and funded it with our by ourselves, all the capital. Then we were acquiring the next building in Durham. The building was listed for 725. So obviously you got to get a loan. If you're going conventional financing for real estate, you're going to be 20, 25, 30% down. So the SBA was our only path for that at the time. And so with our second school, we were able to do SBA financing, including working capital. So I think so the building was 725. I think our working capital was 120. So our loan with fees was 850, 880, something like that. And we worked with SunTrust Bank at the time, had a great lender, Mike Goddard, shout out to Mike. And the process was really smooth, really positive. It was great for us. When we acquired the building in Lexington, we did the same thing. So it was SBA again. And we essentially followed the same model. We used Newtek that time. Newtek's a big national lender based in New York. So the building was 625. We got 125, 150 in working capital. Um,
What about with the one where you acquired the business in Georgia?
yep. So
What was that SBA process like compared to the other
yeah.
ones?
So it got harder for two reasons, obviously. So with the first two, our portfolio is smaller, so there's fewer things for the SBA to review, fewer things for them to question, fewer documents to provide. But by that point, we had four school entities, so 4 operating companies, 4 real estate holding companies, plus my pool business. So we had five, basically 9 or 10 things. Um, and we were acquiring a business. So on the SBA, I know you tell people this. If there's seller side stuff, that complicates the process as well, right? You know, tax certificates and all the seller's financials and all the kind of the license, and it became a ton more complicated. But we were able to kind of push through the process. We actually, in that deals fall apart, the seller actually had debt on affiliated businesses
Oh,
that, yeah, that almost didn't, we almost didn't get to the finish line. I think the sellers ultimately didn't cash out any and had to bring like 40 or $42,000 to the table just to close, to wipe out the debt from all their other things, or the liens kind of, they were cross collateralized. So it was really tough in that we had more entities, there were seller issues, um, and the loan was a lot bigger, right? So for that, the real estate was 1.25, and the opco, I think we paid 660, 187. Yeah, the total loan was like 1.87. We actually did have the seller hold a note on that one. They held a note of 120, but it covered 5% of the down payment. Um,
so on that deal, did you put down 5%, or did you have to put down anything? What did that look like?
we put down 5% on that deal. So we did 10% on the Durham school, 10% on Lexington, and 5% on that one. And with the seller held note and the 5%, I can't remember our total loan product, but obviously, you always want to try to get the seller to hold a note. And you want to try to get your down payment as low as possible. And you want to try to roll in real estate because your amortization can go from 10 years to 25 years. So one of the great things, right, with our schools is that I'm getting working capital over 25 years. Um,
That's huge.
First couple, exactly right. And yeah, the SBA product is great for anybody who's looking to acquire a business. And I've met a bunch of people on Trends or locally or through your group or whatever. And if they're talking about, investors or, starting a business or buying a business, I say, look, like take however much capital you have. If it's 30,000 or 50,000 or 150,000, like look at a business that's making 250, 300, that's selling for 750 to 900, and use your capital, own 100% of it, right? Make it your baby. Because once you bring in investors or a bunch of these complications, you have to be responsible and accountable to them. You got to report to them. Like that way, if you buy as much as you can with your capital using the SBA, which is a great product, you can control your destiny and have a lot more freedom
And
mentally.
what do you tell people who are like, asking you whether they should start or buy?
I say buy. Like if you need income immediately, always buy, right? Because the pool businesses, they were, like I said, they were a train rolling down the track. The money came in day one, right? Money came in week one. The money came in month one. And with these daycares, like we're rolling dice, right? Like I know it's going to work, but I don't know if it's going to be 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or 15 months or 18 months. Like I don't know how far down the road it's going to take us to become profitable. But I know when I bought this pool business, we were servicing customers tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
We're profitable this week and next week. So I think if you need to replace income or if you need to have income, acquisition is the best way to go, definitely. And if you're bad at business, there's processes in place, right? You've got the manager who knows the playbook, right? You've got the service manager who knows how to fix pools. Like your vendor's already set up, your floor plan's already set up. So if you are inexperienced, I shouldn't say bad at this. If you're inexperienced, it's you're stepping into something that is working.
Yeah. No, I think that's the biggest reason, the biggest draw for a lot of folks who are coming from corporate 9 to 5. Like I guess when you were in your 20s, maybe some folks a little later now, but I think a lot of folks are. This is sort of like a really appealing approach because of that. So,
Yeah.
any trend, you've been buying businesses for longer than a lot of people. What have you seen trends wise? It's been going on for the past 10, 15 years.
Man, I hadn't thought about that question, so I'd need to think about it for a minute. I can tell you in the childcare space, there does not seem to be a lot of good acquisition targets in the market right now. We've got private equity folks and like brokers calling us saying, hey, there's a complete lack of good opportunities for childcare. Do you want to sell? Right. So a lot of brokers are actively approaching um, early childhood daycare operators and owners to sell because there's a lack of good deals in the market. Um, I think maybe this is wrong. I don't know. You can give me your opinion. It seems like the caliber of brokers and sims and deals is decreasing. Like I feel like 15 years ago on BizQuest or BizBuySell, 80% of the offerings that you had good data, you had a good sim, the broker had a good hand grasp of the deal, valuations were reasonable. Here's an example. We looked at a deal, I think I told Bill this. We looked at a deal in Lexington, was listed at 1.8 million. No data. So we inquired. We said, "Hey, what's the, can you give me the revenue?" Revenue was like 540,000 and EBITDA was like 80,000.
Wow.
And you're like, what in the world? This is insane, right? It's not even in the ballpark, right? And so I think you see a lot of that, like a lot of deals are,
Brokers that send you Sims that are just Word docs sometimes.
yeah.
I've gotten that.
So we inquired about a deal in Greenville, South Carolina. It's 2024, right? We got two things. We got the P&Ls from 2020 and 2021. Nothing else. Not a this is the name of the school, not a not 2023. We got two documents, 2020 and 2021 P&L. It's like, what in the world is this? Like, how did some seller decide to use this broker to sell their business? So maybe that's just me, but I feel like that's a trend that might not be helpful to people though. Um, I mean, I guess with folks like you and Cody Sanchez and a bunch of other folks talking about Main Street businesses and small businesses, one of the trends is that there's a lot more competition for the deals, right? A lot of people want to leave corporate America making 180,000 and replace that with the business making 180,000, which I completely understand, right? That's me, right? So I think there's a lot more competition for deals. I think the brokers are lazier or worse because they don't have to be sharp. Um, but yeah, in terms of like industries, or I think hiring is a lot harder than it was a dozen years ago.
Yeah,
Staffing is
I
harder.
believe that.
That
One, I guess, last question is, a lot of folks are, when looking at childcare, what's your thought on like the franchise versus independent schools? Because that's also another consideration, right?
Yep. Um, so I actually also bought a franchise last year.
Oh,
We'll just touch on that so I can talk about franchising a little bit. I bought it in the home services vertical. It's a fence construction company. I bought 9 territories. Um, and so I had avoided franchising at all costs because I'm so independent. I'm so anti-authoritarian. I thought that that would be very bad for me. But I found a franchise that I really like the owner. I really like the team, and it felt like, and this has been the case, it's been kind of franchise light. Like they're not overly extreme on you got to do everything exactly the way we say. It's like here's the framework and stay within this framework. Um, but um, just personally, I think the giving up 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% to a franchise in perpetuity is the wrong decision. Um, it might be right for some people who really, really need all the framework, but um, I mean, at risk of running afoul from my franchise, or like the stuff that we're doing is really simple. It's really, really right. And so I'm going to be paying them this royalty in perpetuity. And it's like I could have figured this out in 90 days by myself if I just taken the time and effort to do it. But at the where we were in life and with our businesses and whatever, it was the right decision. And I like the franchise and I like the product and I like how things are going. But giving up 10% in perpetuity is a tough go. So I would say buying independent childcare as opposed to starting it or franchise is really the best path. And I've looked at a lot of franchise childcare centers for sale that are towards the end and they want to just get out and not extend the franchise. And I have an investor who's partnered with a franchise childcare owner. I won't name the brand. It's one of the big 3 or 4 brands, and it is not gone well for them. So I know that there are Goddards and Primroses and Lighthouse, some of those that are franchises that are successful, but for me, I would not do that.
no, no, that's good. That's great perspective. I know we're at that time, so I want to be sensitive to your time, Jay. Any sort of final words of wisdom for those who, especially, a lot of folks listening who are, current business owners who maybe have started a business or just first-time business buyers that want to leave their corporate 9 to 5. Any words of wisdom, whether it's for folks who want to buy or start.
Yep.
from someone who's done it, a bunch of times.
I would say if you have runway and you don't have to incur the debt, start. If you need income immediately, buy. And it's going to take a ton of work, a ton of time, a ton of effort. Get the right people in your corner, right? Get advisors and coaches and lawyers who can help advise you. Get mentors who've done it before, right? If you're like, the power of a cold email is astounding, right? I'd happily help anyone buy a business if they just emailed me or called me. And I know a lot of business owners like me who would do the same. So, it's going to take a ton of work. It's going to take a ton of time. Deals are going to fall through. But ultimately, if you want financial freedom and time freedom, there's just no other way, right? Like for me, it was really about time freedom, so that I could spend more time doing the things I wanted with my wife, my kids, my friends, so that I could go to the beach on Tuesday if I wanted to. So for me, it was really about time freedom. But there are days when there's $80 in your bank account, and you think, holy, how am I gonna make it to next week, right? How are we gonna make payroll? So you have to have a high risk tolerance. And I think a lot of people who've been in corporate America for a long time lose that. And so I think it's the right decision for someone who wants the freedom, but it's risky and it's stressful. And there are moments where you think, oh gosh, how are we going to get out of this? And you got to have the gut for that to do it.
Yeah, no one. You definitely do. So, Jay, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great. I've learned a lot. I know everyone else will feel the same way. Really appreciate your time, and we'll definitely, obviously, we'll be in touch.
Yes. Sounds good. Thank you, Helen.